Book 3, Chapter 103, continuing with verse 12. As the seasons cause changes in trees, so the mind makes differences in the dispositions of living beings. The mind indulges in its sport of deeming an inch a mile, and vice versa, of thinking something long as short, like the operations of our dreams and fancy. So what we learn here is the nature of the mind is discrimination, looking for separation and differences. When we've achieved moksha, the mind disappears. Not that it stops, it just literally ceases to exist. It only exists as an expression of individual karmic traces. Individual karmic traces are literally fractures in the wholeness. It's these fractures in the wholeness that create the sense of separation that we feel as individual existences. This is what makes us believe incorrectly that we exist. The fractures in the wholeness of the individual karmic traces. So this is a key point and an important one to understand. If in your mind there exists your mind, if you have a sense of separation, if you have a compelling need to differentiate between this and that, then you have not arrived. This is not moksha. This is continuation of ignorance. Once the mind disappears, gone, not there anymore, there is nothing wanting or needing or desiring or urging the separation of things, of sensing one thing and another, then moksha has been achieved. Now at moksha level 1, there is a clear memory of the mind, and there is a memory of how the mind operated. It's like when you owned something for a long period of time, and then the ownership ceases. You lost that thing. It was taken from you. It was sold. It was destroyed. That thing that you own, there's always a memory of that thing. So there is in moksha level 1 a memory of the mind. That memory of the mind is caused by peripheral karmic traces. All memory is caused by karmic traces. As we advance to moksha level 2, that memory becomes more faint. At moksha level 3, even more faint. At moksha level 4, the memory continues to remain. It is, however, a memory of more expanded universal existence, but still the sense of existence remains. It's only at moksha level 5 when even the memory of existence disappears. At the fullness of moksha level 5, there is no existence. There is no memory of ever being a separate or existent person. There is only the bliss of wholeness, of pure being, pure consciousness, the supreme, divine, silent witness, Shiva. There is no time. It is all eternity. There is only bliss. A kalpa age is shortened to a moment, and a moment is stretched into a kalpa by the different modes of the mind that regulate both the duration of time and the distance between places. These different modes of the mind are individual and divine karmic traces. When the memory is there of a kalpa age, then it is divine karmic traces. When the memory is there of shorter periods of time, a moment, a day, a month, a year, it is individual karmic traces. The perceptions of the quickness and slowness of motion and of much or little in quantity, and also of swiftness or slowness of time belong to the mind and not to the dull material body. The material body is just an inanimate vehicle in which consciousness resides when we are in a state of existence. The feelings of sickness and error, sorrow and danger, and the passing of time and distance of place all rise in the mind like the leaves and branches of trees. The mind is the cause of all its feelings. Just as water is the cause of the sea and heat and fire. Hence, the mind is the source of all things. It is intimately connected with whatever exists in the world. The thoughts that we have of agent, effect, and instrument of thing, and also of the viewer, view and instrumentality of sight, all belong to the mind. Now, the mind in this case can be the individual mind based on individual karmic traces, or it can be the cosmic mind based on divine karmic traces and memories of the Loka, the divine expression of Shiva, like a wave on an ocean of pure consciousness. A memory of that wave of pure consciousness still exists. This is moksha level 4. The mind is alone is perceived to be in existence in the world. When we are in existence and we have thrown off all aspects of koshas, bodies that we inhabit on the way to the fullness of moksha level 5, we perceive ourselves as the cosmic mind. Which goes through various stages because of the nature of manifestation. Manifestation arises from pure consciousness, always in stages. Like a wave arises from a still lake. Imagine a lake that is totally still, no ripples, nothing. And somehow, magically, there becomes a bulge in the surface of the lake, and that bulge rises up to become a wave of water on the surface of this perfectly still lake. That wave arises sequentially in stages. And as that wave is beginning to arise, if one is identified with the wave and not with the lake, then one begins to perceive one's self as standing out from the lake, existing. And as soon as there comes any perception at all, that perception is caused by the mind. The mind forms whenever there is any activity, movement in pure being. It's like a bubble of pure being. It has magically separated itself into something that is standing out from pure being. To reinforce this sense of existence, the mind creates the 5 senses so that it can differentiate with what it is and what something else may be. And if there is nothing else, the mind creates something else. The mind is responsible for all existence. The mind alone is perceived to be in existence in the world, as its representations of force and all other things are but variations of itself. So the thinking man sees only the substance of gold and all its various forms of bangles and bracelets are taken for nothing. Now, when we think about this, using the mind, when we contemplate on this, what happens? As we trace our existence back to its source, we are walking the ladder of karmic traces. And as we touch on every karmic trace in the ladder of karmic traces, it will balance that karmic trace. So this one practice alone, contemplating how it is, what is the nature of existence, how it is that we believe we have existence, is sufficient to balance 100% of all karmic traces eventually. Chapter 104. A magician, a horse, and a stunned king Lavana. Vashishta said, Ram, hear me relate a very pretty story about the world as an enchanted city stretched out by magic of the magician mind. There lies on the surface of this earth a large and populous tract of land by the name of Northern Pandava, a country full of forests of various kinds. The forests were deep and dense, and a number of holy hermits live in the vastness of these woods. Vijayadhara maidens had constructed many dwellings of swinging vines. The breeze blew up heaps of red dust from full-blown lotuses, rising as high as crimson hills on the ground decorated with wreaths and garlands from loads of flowers falling from surrounding trees. Groves of karanja plants were decorated with bundles of blossom to the farthest boundaries of the jungle. And the sky resounded with the rustling noise of leafy date trees in the surrounding villages. There was a range of tawny rocks on one side and fields browned with ripened grain on another, while the warbling of cerulean doves echoed in the resonant grove. The shrill cry of the stork sounded in the forest, and branches of spice and patali flowers hang down like earrings on the hill. Flocks of various birds made a chorus with their cries, and blooming crimson blossoms of Paribhadra trees hung over the banks all along the length of running stream. Maidens in cornfields were exciting the passion of love with their singing. Breezes blowing amidst forests of fruit and flowers dropped down the blossoms in copious showers. Birds, spiritual masters, and seers were sitting and singing outside their homes, made in mountain caves, making the valley symphonious with their celestial strains of holy hymn. Kinara and Gandharva choruses were singing under their bowers of plantain trees, and the grayish and gay groves of flowers were filled with the hum of the whistling breeze. The lord of this romantic country was the virtuous Lavana, a descendant of King Harishchandra, and as glorious as his sire, the sun upon earth. His fair fame formed a white diadem to crown his head and adorn his shoulders with its brightness. It whitened the hills in the form of so many Shivas, smeared with white ash upon his tufted head and person. His sword had made an end of all his enemies, who trembled as in a fit of fever on hearing his noble name. His greatest effort was devoted to support respectable men, and his name was uttered like that of Hari, Vishnu, by all his people. The Apsara fairies, sitting in the celestial seats of the gods on the tops of the Himalayan mountains, gleefully sang songs of his praise. The Lord of the skies heard the songs of the heavenly maids, and the aerial swans and cranes of Brahma responded to the praises with their gabbling cries. His uncommonly magnanimous and wonderful act, free from the fault of being stingy, were unlike anything that was ever heard or seen by anybody. His nature knew no guile, and he was a perfect stranger to pride and arrogance. He kept himself steadfast to his magnanimity, as Brahma held himself first to his Rudraksha beads. He used to take his seat in the royal throne amidst his courtiers as the lord of the day occupies his seat in the sky for the 8 watches of the day. After he was seated there, as happily as the moon in the sky, his chieftains and legions appeared before the throne with their salutation. Now, as you're listening to this, these words, the sentences and phrases, they are evoking images in your mind. The images that they evoke are only there and can only be evoked because there exist some memories. Something like this is known to you, and there can only exist memories because there is a mind. There are individual or divine karmic traces. So by listening to this story, while established in the silent witness, what is happening? You are touching individual or divine karmic traces. And when you touch them, when you put your attention on them, when you excite them by your attention, with these perfect phrases and words, they are balanced. And steps of progress are being made. Continuing with 22. Then, as the royal party was seated in the court hall, beautiful singers began to sing and ravish the hearts of listeners with the music of lutes. Then a set of handsome maids waved the beautiful fans that they held in their hands over the body of the king. Ministers and counselors, as wise as the teachers of the gods and demons, Brihaspati and Shukra, took their seats beside him. Ministers engaged in the public affairs pending before them, and capable officers reported to the king on the conditions of the country. There were learned pundits reciting holy legends from their books and courteous eulogists chanting their sacred phrases on one side. At this time, a magician appeared before the court in his fantastic attire. He boasted and blustered like a roaring cloud, threatening to flood the earth with showers of rain. He bowed down to the ruler of the earth and lowly bent his capped head and neck before the court. Like a tree hangs down its loads of fruit at the foot of a mountain. He approached the king like a monkey advances to a shady and lofty tree loaded with fruit and flowers. Then the cunning trickster conveyed the fragrance of his scent with the breath of his mouth. He addressed the lofty-headed king with his sweet voice, as the bumblebee hums to the lotus. Allow, O Lord, who sits on the earthly throne, like the moon enthroned on high, to mark one wonderful feat of my art, known as the trick of Karolikiva. Saying so, he began to twirl his magic staff, set with peacock feathers, which began to display many wonders, like the wonderful works of creation. The king saw it describing a bright circle, emitting particles of its rays around. He saw it like God Indra sees his variegated rainbow, sparkling afar in the sky. At this time, a chieftain of Sind entered the court. Like a cloud appears in the starry heaven. He was followed by his swift and beautiful war horse, like the Uchchaya Shravas, that seven-headed horse of Indra, follows his master in the celestial regions. The chieftain brought the horse before the king and said, "My lord, this horse is a match for the Uchchaya Shravas, who was produced from the milky ocean and flies with the swiftness of the mind. This horse of mine, O king of the earth, and the best of his kind, and an equal of Uchchaya Shravas, is a personification of the wind in the swiftness of his flight. My master has made a present of this horse to you, my lord, because the best of things is a suitable present to the best of men." After the chief ended his speech, the magician spoke in a voice as sweet as that of the swallow after the roaring of clouds is hushed to silence. "My lord, ride upon this horse and wander at your pleasure with full luster on earth, as the sun shines forth in splendor by revolving round the heavens." Hearing this, the king looked at the horse, and in a voice like that of a peacock, answering a roaring cloud, ordered the horse to be brought before him. The king saw the horse like a figure drawn in painting, and gazed upon him with fixed eyes, and without closing his eyelids, as if the king himself had been turned into a painting. Having looked upon the horse for a long time, he mounted on his back and sat still with his closed eyelid, as sage Agastya was confounded at the sight of the sea and its rock. He continued for a couple of hours, as if he was drowned in his meditation. And as unconscious saints remain in the enjoyment of their internal and spiritual samadhi, he remained spellbound and overpowered by his own might. None could rouse the king, roused from his stupefaction. He remained absorbed in some thoughts of his own mind. Flapping fans ceased to wave about his body, and the holders of the fans remained as still as the moonbeams at night. Courtiers remained motionless at seeing his stillness, as when the filaments of the lotus remain unmoved when smeared in the mud. The noise of people in the courtyard became hushed and quiet, like the roaring of the clouds stops at the end of the rains. Ministers were drowned in their thoughtfulness and questioned at the state of their king, just like the host of gods were filled with anxiety on seeing the club bearing Vishnu fighting with the demon. People were struck with terror and dismay at seeing this paralysis of their king, who remained with his eyes closed, like closed lotuses shorn of their beauty. Chapter 105. The magic spell on King Lavana is broken. Vasishtha continued. After a couple of hours, the king returned to his senses, like the lotus flower, resuming its beauty after the mist of the rainy season weather are over. He shook his body, decorated with ornaments, upon his saddle, like a mountain shakes with its peaks and woods at an earthquake. His seat also shook under him as he came to his senses and moved his body, like the rest, like the seat of Shiva on Kailash mountain is shaken by the movement of the world supporting elephant. As he was about to fall down from the horse, he was held up by the arms of his attendants, like Mount Meru is kept from falling by the hills at its feet and side. Attendants bore the king in the deranged state of his mind, like the still waters of the sea bear the figure of the moon that is disturbed by the waves. The king softly asked them, "Where am I? And whose court is this?" He was like a bee shut up in the flower cup of the lotus, and about to sink in the water, saying, "Ah, where am I? And where am I going?" The courtiers, with a voice as sweet as the lotus, uttering to the sun when he is eclipsed by Rahu, respectfully asked the king what was the matter with him. The attendants and all the ministerial officers asked him what had happened. Like the gods, terrified at the great flood, asked sage Markandeya about what had happened. "Lord, we were greatly dismayed," said they, "upon seeing you in that plight, because the stoutest hearts are broken by accidents proceeding from unknown causes." What were those pleasant objects of your desire that so bewitched your mind? You know that all objects that appear pleasant for the present prove to be bitter at the end. How could your clear understanding, which has been pacified by the grand doctrines and precepts of the wise, fall into the false fascinations of the foolish? The minds of fools are fascinated by the trivial and cheap trifles of common people, but they are of no value to the high-minded as one like yourself. Those who are elated by the pride of their bodies have their minds always excited by uncontrollable passions that take their lead throughout life. Your mind is elevated above common things. It is quiet and calm, enlightened by truth, and filled with excellent qualities. Yet it is strange to find it out of its wits. The mind, unpracticed to reason, is led away by the currents of time and place. But the noble-minded are not subject to the influx of incantations and enchanting spells. It is impossible for the reasoning mind to be weakened or deranged. A high mind, like towering Mount Meru, is not shaken by the boisterous wind.